In this episode of the Business of E-commerce, I talk with Jake Cook about using data science to profitably scale cross-channel e-commerce marketing campaigns. This is the Business of E-commerce, episode 135. Welcome to the Business of E-commerce, the show that helps e-commerce retailers start, launch, and grow the e-commerce business. I'm your host, Charles Plesky, and I'm here today with Jake Cook. Jake is the founder of Tadpull, a company he started in 2013, where they use data to help e-commerce brands profitably scale their marketing campaigns. I asked Jake in the show today to talk about how you can use data science to scale your marketing campaigns. So hey Jake, how you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I am awesome to dig in this topic a little bit. We were talking before the show about we had a few proposed topics and machine learning and data science. I feel like this is the new, we're in 2020. There's a lot of new things going on, but this is kind of the new hotness, right? On using, we've now pulled all this data, right? And I feel like everyone's kind of getting a sense of, yeah, you can like get all this stuff. And now it's like, what do we do with this? So
yes.
Yeah. So what do you guys, so first your product, right? Mm-hmm. Usually I don't go into the product at the beginning, but it's just kind of, it's interesting, right? On you guys basically hook into a lot of different pieces of data and start predicting what customers are basically going to want before they know they want it. Is that kind of the?
Yeah, we work a lot with mid-market companies. And so, there's lots of data, and we always say it's kind of like the kitchen drawer or, the junk drawer you have in your house where you open it up and there's like birthday candles and Band-Aids and all sorts of junk. And that's kind of how their data is structured. And so a lot of what we do is kind of suck into, we call it a data pond. I mean, it's like lily pads of data, if you will. So you have Google Analytics data or Shopify data, inventory data, and we're sucking it all into one place. And when you can kind of get it all organized and neatly put together, you start to find some interesting insights. So for example, you might find that customers out of email buy at 30% higher than people that come through Facebook, or products that don't have great margins, but they turn like really quick, turn out that they're total cash cows. And so, how do you find the customers that buy those products that turn quickly? Well, now we're trying to map the inventory to the customer data. So a lot of it is kind of just drawing those correlations and helping customers see what's possible off these assets they already own.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of this, even I was looking at something the other day with just like ad attribution, and it's really tough, right? Because there's social campaigns and you're doing PPC and then you're remarketing. And if you kind of just look just basic, if you have Facebook and Google AdWords going, they both saying you got a conversion here, and then you realize that's the same conversion. You both can't have that conversion. So like if you did it that way, you're like, I double kind of, you have to add it. But like, how do you know that? Are you doing it on the first click, on the last click? So there's a lot of stuff here. And if you don't have one platform that kind of brings it all together, in your head you would think, I got two conversions, but you really got one. And until you tie that in, it's very hard to suss out.
It is. And I think you hit the nail on the head. You're using first click or last click. How long are your attribution windows? Are you looking back 30 days, and what's the, path length, or how many ways the users come in and go through that. And so part of the answer to that, and attribution is something that's always very, very difficult, if not impossible to solve. So,
okay, so just give up.
Yeah, well, I think
all right. Give up, go home.
It's kind of like, trying to stay in really good shape. It's a lot easier in your 20s than it is in your 40s or 50s. So you should still try, but you may not get,
Yeah, no, you're not ever going to get 100% coverage.
Exactly. I think, but versus just throwing your hands up and saying, okay, whatever Facebook says we converted at, we're going to buy. The source of truth, all these things pipe back through Google Analytics for almost 85% of websites. And unless you're like enterprise and you can afford a really top tier analytics package, site analytics package, Google Analytics is just fine. You can do a lot with that.
Yep.
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head there. Facebook is going to tell you something very different. If you ever compare Google Analytics to Facebook, there'll always be discrepancies
by a lot. Like not it's not
exactly.
It's not by like 2%. Yeah, it's by orders of magnitude. You think it'd be like 2%, and you're like, no, it's off by like triple. Like it's very strange.
It's very, very strange. And I think so. A lot of what we've been trying to work on is giving our clients' first-party data. So we have our own pixel. So all that data that Amazon or Google or Facebook has, our mission is to kind of give that to mid-market or the smaller guys. And so, the users as they came through the site, what they did, if they, obviously be compliant with privacy laws in the process. But with that, you start to have this asset you build of like you really understand your customers, and you're not seeing it through the filtered view of Facebook or Google. And you can do some really amazing things. It takes time to build that data set, though, to do the AI on it. And that's something that it can take you 2 years to build the data set, and it takes you 2 weeks to have the algorithm run against it. So
today's episode is sponsored by Drip. Drip is the world's first e-commerce CRM and a tool that I personally use for email marketing and automation. Now, if you're ever in an e-commerce store, you need to give Drip a try, and here's why. Drip offers one-click integrations for both Shopify and Magento. There's robust segmentation, personalization, and revenue dashboards to give you an overview of how your automation emails are performing. One of my favorite features of Drip is the Visual Workflow Builder. It gives you a super easy way to build out your automation rules visually and see the entire process. It lets you get started quickly, but also build very complex automation rules. It's powerful, but also easy to learn, unlike a lot of email tools that offer the same type of automation. To get a demo of Drip today, you can go head over to drip.com/BOE. That's drip.com/BOE. Now, onto the show.
Yeah. So if somebody's kind of listening at home and they want to do something like this, right? They're running their AdWords, they're running their Facebook, they have their analytics, maybe even they have their Shopify BigCommerce data. Where do you even get started trying to like put these all together?
So one of the easiest things you can do to get started, just to kind of like get a sense of your customer base, is most people have acquisition costs, customer acquisition costs, CAC, there's ratios of your customer acquisition cost versus a lifetime value. So one of the ways to get a lifetime value is a really simple way is just get your customer records and your orders, and just with some very basic Excel jockeying, you can see which customers buy a lot. And then you can also look at returns. So if you have customers that buy a lot, you see a free shipping, they buy all the time, but they return all the time. You can start to say, okay, we're going to filter them out. And you can start to build these little segments manually. And in the analysis, you'll come across all sorts of really interesting insights. So you can start to slice the data by geography or zip code, for example, or even state, cities, things like that. But it really starts to what they call recency, frequency, and monetary. RFM is what they call it in customer analytics. But you're looking at that as kind of a way to think about what your most customers look like. So how recently they purchased, how frequently they purchase, and then how much they actually purchased, the monetary piece as well. And that can all be done with just exporting a customer list out of Shopify and doing some very basic Excel jockeying and some pivot tables and things like that.
Yeah, I feel like being good at Excel is like a superpower in this in many industries. Like you have to, every once in a while I talk to someone, they're like, yeah, I don't know Excel that well. And they're like, you might want to take a course. Like that's
it's and if you're really hardcore, a lot of this stuff can be built with Python and some stuff with these notebooks. And a lot of this stuff, if you can just do some very basic coding, you can kind of huck it in there and get the data clean and get it into a notebook, they call it, and start to see what it does. So that's where it gets really fun.
Okay. So, but you would say at least try to get as much data as you can out of these, like figure out how to suck it out of Facebook, suck it out of Google, like just get it out of their platform, basically.
Yeah, I think getting it back. And the nice thing is you kind of need a way to they call like a master key, if you will, or a way to kind of like align everything. And An email address, if you can get an email address, you can kind of, match that to your customer record, maybe match that to a lead gen ad in Facebook, for example, and kind of pivot that. Again, it's not trivial to do this stuff, so it can be kind of complicated. But if you grind on it, you'll be all of a sudden, and it takes time, but you'll start to see your acquisition costs fall because you're really honing in on the right target audience, or those lookalike audiences, for example, can be really well done. And you run like a more profitable business at the end of the day because you're not spending money on customers that are going to buy in return. So if you have to go out and raise capital, it can be a really powerful asset if you really understand the kind of the mechanisms and the lifetime value off your own individual data. You can go and say like, hey, we have a lifetime value of 3 years and it's about this type of revenue and this is what it costs to acquire these customers. Investors really like to hear that. And even if you're wrong, maybe there's slop in the system, but the fact that you're even thinking that way, they really, really like to see that kind of sophistication we've seen.
Well, and just having that data kind of gives you the guts, right, to say, I'm willing to like 10x down on this. Like I'm willing to really take a big bet on X because I believe in it. Like we have the data, we did the analysis. Because without that, you're basically just gambling at that point, right? You're just trying, like you're trying random things unless you really know.
Yeah, and exactly, and it's kind of that we call it the social media slot machine. Yeah. Where you're just kind of pulling the slot machine, hoping you get 3 cherries and you cash out. And there's also that I think Andrew Chan, he was growth at Uber. He's at Andreessen Horowitz, but he had this thing he calls it kind of the law of bad click-throughs. Basically, he uses a little bit more profanity in it, but basically, over time, if you identify an acquisition channel, over time, economics tells us that people will flock to it. And so we've seen a lot of businesses that will get built in 2 or 3 years on, like, say, Instagram stories or some sort of Snapchat or some sort of hack like that. But over time, it eventually kind of starts to acquisition costs rise and the lifetime value isn't there. Then it can really kind of put you in a bad spin if you can't exit the business.
Yeah, so. I was talking on the last show on the very last 134, and I'm old enough to remember when AdWords was cheap. So people were like, this AdWords is like a great deal. Like, it's like 10 cents per click, and now it's like you couldn't get a 10 word term for 10 cents at this point. So it's
exactly
different. But like when it first came out, when these channels were new, that was a thing. And like if you look at new emerging channels right now, like you said, like when Instagram stories was a new thing, that was possible. So it's a matter of the platform and a time. And if you're reading old, ebooks or blog articles, they're already past date, right? You need to look at what's coming up now.
Yeah, and I think and then testing with your customer base because that's the whole trick of it. If you can jump ahead and get a piece of it, I'm always a little bit nervous to build on platforms that, like a Snapchat, for example, like it's great, but be thinking about ways with a cross-channel approach. We're like, okay, we're gonna harvest customers on Snapchat, but we're gonna move them into an email sequence, or we're gonna put them into email because that's a channel we can own. We can do automations and flows that way, but we're not just purely reliant on Snapchat to make revenue for us. So kind of managing the risk a little bit with the cross-channel approach is something we really try and work with clients on.
So when you're saying cross-channel and the whole master key, right? The part that kind of I see is a little tricky, right? Once you get that customer, you get the email address, like that's the master key. I get it. That's like your email address. I can email you. You're a unique person. What do I do higher up in the funnel, right? Like when that person just happens to click on the ad for the first time, just happens to view a blog post. You pixeled them, but you don't, it's 5 steps before the email. What do you do there to kind of link that all together?
Yeah, kind of top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, and bottom of the funnel. Yep. I think are
tofu, mofo,
really
and
interesting.
bofo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the
yes.
fun acronyms. I would say it really depends on kind of like maybe a better idea or think of this might be, let's run through an example. Do you want to give me like an example that we can kind of riff on of like a company? Because like B2B or B2C, price point, all this I've seen really influence it in radical ways. So why don't we could do a Yeti cooler. Yeah,
Yeti cooler, coffee mug. Coffee mug is good, actually. It's a cheaper product. I feel like cheap is an easier, it's usually a shorter window, right, of time. So.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll say we're going to sell the Yeti coffee mug. They're like $30 at retail. So top of the funnel. I mean, seeing it, let's say they came in from a paid ad on social. We can start to see kind of what they're doing, and to your point, we can pixel them. What we're looking for at that point is we might look at Google Analytics to get started and say, for this product category, how fast do people purchase? And if it's a coffee mug, we know most 80-90% buy within the first day. So we know that purchase decision is going to happen pretty quick.
And that's something Google can pull out, right? You can say people that start, like first time we saw them to checkout, and you can run that all on analytics, dump that out.
Yeah, and that'll give us, and again, we'll get, they'll have a customer ID or, we don't know who they are necessarily, but we'll get a sense of like, for this product, this is how these users buy. And if you have enhanced e-commerce with Google Analytics set up on your site, it's pretty straightforward to do this. So let's say we have that data. We'll look and say, okay, most people buy a mug, and at $30, they're going to buy in the first day. We'd want to look for any like lurking variables in that. Do we offer free shipping? No shipping? What is that? Is it, are there products sold with it? We may look through our order data a little bit on that. And knowing that people buy within the first day, we would say, okay, well, we're going to run some pretty heavy retargeting based on maybe time of day. and see what that's going to look like. And then the next step I would say we could kind of test a little bit is usually what you see is like a lot of people buy in the first day, and then, out at day 21 or day 30, you'll see another kind of bump where people purchase. So we might run some tests to say, we're going to fire up retargeting 2 weeks later, because we see a nice, farther out, some customers start to buy then too. And then we can look at our acquisition costs. Is it cheaper then versus like trying to hit them really quick within 24 hours and kind of test it that way. So,
okay. So you're really looking down to a product or product category or just product level and really try to map it out on like, what's the buying journey at the top, like just for my site. Like I sell Yeti, like, let's say I'm Yeti and I sell coolers and mugs and chairs, not like what's that, but what is the journey for this coffee mug and what's that look like?
Yes. And let's say it's a brand new customer. They're not on an email list or something like that. It's pure customer acquisition. I think then, looking at the path length is in Google Analytics is a really, I think, good place to start. Because, if it's a higher price point or there's more research involved in the decision, that's where search and forums and Reddit can come in, customer reviews, all that kind of stuff that can kind of influence it. But I always say, like, in our experience, the lower the risk, the quicker the conversion. So it's a coffee mug. It's got, 4.8 out of 5 stars, 3,000 people reviewed it. The brand of Yeti's behind it. We took the risk out of it. I'll probably purchase it.
Yep.
If it's a new emerging medicine for, say you have an allergy or something, and there's side effects that might increase, it might be like profuse bleeding from the nose or something, then you're going to probably, the path length to convert will be a long time before you ever would purchase that or something. Yeah.
So would you say start with kind of the simple products? You're not trying to map out like a 90-day journey. You're trying to map out like a 2-hour journey at the beginning.
Yeah. And again, I always like to come back to like, what is margin turns or where do we make, if we don't make, maybe we make say 20% on that $30 mug, but we just sell them like crazy. The margin, the turns make up the margins. Whereas say the cooler make 50% margins. If I'm Yeti, we might think about, you got to run some math to figure out where to kind of focus and what the top line revenue and profit can be from it. So it gets a little bit more into the finance side of it, but, low risk decisions that purchase in the first day. Those are great. The more complicated ones that could be a couple weeks. One of our clients sells really high end backpacks, and that can be like 8 to 9 visits before they purchase. And these are extremely well made, super high quality, like $400 or $500 backpacks. That's a very different customer journey where you might need to drop them into get them to sign up for a 3-part series and on Facebook and an email series, and you kind of use an email and Facebook back and forth, some retargeting, all that to orchestrate it.
For something like that, once you have that analytics data, is there a way from Google Analytics to actually link that pixel data with the email address, or like when? Right, because I'm trying to think can you see that full? How much I spent on an ad to acquire a customer versus that same customer bought once, maybe they bought 10 times. Like, how do you link? Where does that ever get linked, or does it? Is that because I know Google tries to obscurify that, the pixel, like the visitor down to the actual physical human.
Yeah, there's like, for example, in Google Analytics, there's sessions versus users. Yep. So you have cross-device challenges there where, I see something on my phone, I research it on my tablet, but then I check out on my laptop. So, that can be potentially 3 users. If I'm on different IP addresses, it could be 3 users to Google, or different sessions. So that's all gets really messy pretty quickly. I would say, you can look at return on ad spend, and that's a good metric to start with, and that's kind of what the industry standards are. But when you look at your margin structure in there, you may be able to handle, maybe a 250 to 250% return on ad spend, because your margin structures are so much better if you're selling direct. So you maybe make a 70% margin. You can take a way lower ROAS number because you just make more cash on the back end.
But you're just trying to say that return on ad spend on that first, like, you're not even looking at, hey, we can get them on the email marketing list and sell another 2, 3, 4 times. You're just saying, what's the return on ad spend on that number one sale at that point?
Yeah, and if we're running a 4th of July campaign for Yeti to sell tumbler drinking cups or whatever, like we might just, time bound it by a holiday or something like that and run it. If you're running more of an evergreen campaign that's a longer term piece, you can segment by the campaign by dates and geography and all sorts of interesting things like that. But to your point, and that's kind of the holy grail, right? Where that user came from, I know them. There's a lot of permission-based marketing that needs to be built into that, where the user can sign up or get some value in exchange for that. And that's, I think, where the next phase is really going, is loyalty. Amazon Prime is built around getting that really good visibility to the user and the loyalty around it. So I think a lot of mid-market companies can do some fantastic stuff with loyalty. And I'm going to log in to earn my points or get exclusive access or whatever. Now I can, as a data scientist, I can really match you to all your attributions, where you came from, device, all that good stuff. And in exchange for that, you're getting hopefully rewards through loyalty.
Yeah, because I've always started thinking that like loyalty, right? Like that user that you acquired maybe through Instagram was just kind of, even if they purchased a product, maybe they would just happen to be scrolling through some, let's just say Instagram or Facebook, right? They were just scrolling. They weren't thinking of buying, but they happened to see the mug. They liked it. 4th of July is coming up. They just hit buy, done. But that user that maybe acquired through PPC, they were searching best coffee mugs. They were doing, and you have a whole different campaign. Maybe paid more to acquire that user, but it turns out now they're like a coffee mug aficionado, and they ordered 9 of them. I know they just kept buying more coffee mugs. And I actually own like 8 Yetis, so maybe that's,
me too.
Maybe I'm just talking about me.
I'm the same way.
Yeah, so you understand. So like you might have paid less to acquire that person through social, but they just bought it as a gift real quick. Versus that other person, PPC, is Googling about coffee mugs. They're a nerd. They've researched them, but then now they just keep buying. Is there any way to kind of link up all that data to really understand, the PPC one is really like, it's not just convert, because the ROAS is worse, right? So it could be significantly worse with PPC, but maybe because it's so intent based, I'm just thinking of a scenario like this where like a very deep, and that's big, right? And that insight could really change like how you advertise.
Yeah, you're asking some fantastic questions. I think that for a lot of it's easier than ever to get into e-com, right? I mean, it's it's so easy to get into it. It's also incredibly hard to be profitable or run a good, and you can see companies that can get to 20 million and like basically breaking even or barely producing any profit for the owners because of all this stuff. And so to your point, yeah, intent versus inspiration, right? Inspiration on social. Oh, my friends are at the beach. Yes, I need that coffee mug. That looks like it'd be fun, blah, blah, blah. Or the, intent of like best coffee mug for commuting. And that's, I think, where PPC starts to weave into like SEO. So if you can look at your keyword campaigns and which phrases are kind of working by campaign, you can start to think about writing blog content and email series and welcome series and things like that off that. Whereas, and this is where AI and machine learning gets a little bit black box, where you can huck all this stuff into Facebook and Instagram and it'll go find you customers. And here's how much I'll pay to acquire them. This is what it kind of performs. But you're not really getting at the deeper economics or what's going to build the profitable business side of it. And that's okay, by the way. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It kind of depends on your overall goals of the business. But I want to really understand as much as possible what's driving not only my top line, but my profit. And if I'm acquiring a lot of customers on Instagram and they're not that profitable because they buy and they return all the time because it was an impulse buy, I'd much rather like punt a little bit on top line revenue, but knowing PPC is giving me consistent customers because their intent was there. They bought what they were really looking for. They don't return, and this gets in the weeds a little bit, but I think the way how you can kind of start to track that is with really good UTM parameters, or really tag the links really cleanly and really. This is whiteboard. Sit at the whiteboard and really think your campaigns through cleanly, and then tag all those links instead of just saying 4th of July campaign. 4th of July intent, very, very clean tagging is a good way to get at it, because that'll all flow through Google Analytics, and then you can start to like have the file folders, if you will, on how traffic's coming in. Everything's kind of neatly organized in your file cabinet.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like the way you're approaching this, you're zooming very like deep in on a very specific product campaign, like in analyzing just like one very particular flow, trying to isolate it, analyze it, and then move to the next one is kind of what it sounds like your approach is.
I think, yeah. And especially in mid-market e-com, there's so much to get done. And I would say analyzing off profit or whatever you're trying to do with the business is super important because, again, over and over and over again, I've just seen so many businesses that are doing 5 to 50 million and nobody has any idea kind of how they've done it, or they built it on some things that were a little bit shaky. And, like Amazon, for example, you can whip up a store on Amazon. That's great. And that can be good for cash flowing it. But if you build the whole thing on Amazon, like all of a sudden you get a letter from, Amazon saying, hey, we're going to take 2 more margin points this quarter. What are you going to do about it? Well, you don't, you built something on land you don't own, you were renting it. And so being very thoughtful on that piece of it. And then then once you understand one flow or one product or one economic part of the lever, you can expand out into the other parts of the business.
Yeah. I think I was talking to a founder once and kind of said, how did you grow? And because I started talking about this marketing channel, and they're like, yeah, but astronomical growth within 12 months. And they said, yeah, but when I kill that channel, we're doing this other thing. And I was thinking, wait, why? Why are you doing that? And they're like, that's not ultimately, we knew we could do that to that was like the steroids, right? It was bad. It was like the crack, right? They were going to do it. They knew they could get big, but they knew they were building on sand. And they knew as soon as they get to a certain point, they could hire, X number of people, these very specific roles. Then they could do everything internal and go from this shaky foundation to now we're going to really build it the way we want to. I always found that the most insightful, but they did it with such, they knew we had to get to this certain revenue goal so that we could hire XYZ, so that we could really run these campaigns. And now we can really do it because they couldn't do it. They couldn't start from zero. That was the thing. And they knew it.
That's awesome. I think that's a huge piece of it. And back to the economics. I mean, a lot of this stuff you've seen some implosions with direct to consumer companies because they've raised money from investors and all that money basically goes to run paid ads. And they're not thinking about some of the unit economics. There's some really good professors. One's at Wharton named Peter Fader. Another guy's Daniel McCarthy. He's at Emory. And they do some really good breakdowns on IPOs, like S1s as companies go public. And they've looked at Slack and Peloton and Wayfair. And they go after Wayfair pretty hard off the numbers. And it's really interesting because their acquisition costs are so high. And when you figure in all these other things, but the lifetime value doesn't make sense. So they're kind of propped up with investor dollars, and the unit economics sooner or later will come home to roost. So yeah, if you know what you're going to do, and look, we got to, to your point, we got to do the steroids to get the thing going to then transition out. I think just being very thoughtful at the outset of what that is.
Yep. What are some other things that you've seen as people started to scale have come up, or either they've thought of or haven't thought of as they scale? Because those are always kind of surprising. It's almost like a game of golf, right? Where you have to get good at one thing, but then as soon as you do that, you're basically now doing something else that's not that thing anymore.
Yeah. Oh man, it's what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
All the time.
It's all the time.
I think what scales,
constantly. That's
all
the thing.
Time.
Yeah.
I think a couple of different things. One I've seen a lot is they don't have good roles defined on the team. So-and-so, we have a digital marketing team. Well, what does digital marketing really mean? So, good roles, accountability. Here's, this person's doing SEO and this is how we're going to hold them accountable. The other thing I've seen a lot is the area to scale is it'll take a lot more capital than they realize. Growth takes cash. And I think that's something that can trip people up. You can go really, really fast, but say you're on Amazon and you don't get paid for 90 days, your cash flow cycles will eat you alive on that. So that's another one I've seen. Honestly, the other one too is just not knowing margins or being super tight on no understand their margins and all the costs that go into that. And then what are our goals for this year and this quarter, and then breaking them down by month and week, and every week just grinding and looking at the data, making tweaks and modifications off that. A lot of folks don't even really know what they want to do on every 90 days or, well, we want to grow 30%. Okay, well, exactly how do you grow 30%? Well, we're going to do it on Facebook ads. Okay, what kind of Facebook ads? On mobile? You got to get very specific because until you get it down to that level, you can't really measure it. If you can't measure it, you're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall. And you can get lucky. You can get lucky that way too, but I'd much rather not use luck. I'd much rather use science as much as possible.
Well, I mean, if you're saying for your quarterly goal, we're going to run 10 experiments. We don't know which one's going to, we're going to run some mobile, 3 mobile ones, 2 desktop ones, 2 on Facebook, 3 on AdWords, whatever. And you kind of just define these are my experiments. that's one thing. You're still doing science, and you don't.
Yes.
And that's a measurable thing. Did you run 10, or did you only actually get 5 right done? Whatever. So at least that you can actually measure the experiments, and out of that, then next quarter when you set your goals, you might come back and say, okay, we found out 8 of them were dogs, but these 2. Now our quarterly goal is to 10x down on these 2 experiments we ran. So that's, as long as you kind of know, you can still try different things. You just need to know that you're trying things, and separate them out.
Yeah. And I was a physics major in school. So one thing when I wasn't the most brilliant math talent for sure, but one thing physics taught me is what are our givens and what are we trying to solve for? Yes. And if you think about what are our givens, and what are we solving for, it's very simple, but if you can kind of use that logic. Yeah, we're going to try user-generated content on Instagram. We're going to run 3 ads around these types of value propositions. That's awesome. Totally go for it, and more often than not with that stuff, you'll be shocked, number 3, which you thought was awful, will outperform everything by 10x. And, that's how you unlock this really good customer acquisition funnel, by testing some of that kind of stuff. But a lot of times as they get ready to scale, they don't really even have some of these pieces in place. They've done some of that stuff which got them success and is awesome, but you can't repeat that in a repeatable way or have a process for making repeatable experiments. And maybe that's kind of the biggest lesson I've seen, is be very thoughtful on that part of it.
Yeah, I've seen folks taking some notes here, but they kind of see something that's working, and instead of doing the experiment themselves, they're almost copying someone else's experiment, and it gets them further faster. But then, like you said, as they scale, they're not seeing why. They don't have all the failed experiments, right? So they don't know why those other things didn't work and why this one did. So when they try to, and then whatever, Instagram stops working and they need to do that same thing on another channel, but they can't figure out how to replicate that on Snapchat anymore. They're just dead in the water. So I've definitely seen that. And a lot of times it's just because people are just reading something or copying something, but they're not really understanding why they did the thing in the first place.
Yeah, hacks are great, right? Yeah. We all want hacks. We all want a shortcut, right? The problem with a hack, though, is oftentimes you don't understand why it worked as well as you probably need to. And if it works for a while, you start to build this false confidence in it. The whole joke that once you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And then all of a sudden you walk in and everything's a screw. It's like, oh, I can't really pound a screw into the wall without a lot of effort and mess. So, yeah, I think that's a very common thing. And especially with online, because you can go on Twitter or follow along with some of these really smart, PPC or paid media experts, and you can copy some of their methods and get it working. But again, I've seen over again where the algorithm changes, right? And then all of a sudden it doesn't, your ROAS blows up. And or some people live horrible lives because they're on these massive emotional swings where ads are killing it one day and then they're not the next, and then they're back up. And you can see them on Twitter just self-destructing because they're so freaked out all the time. And I always think of when it comes to customer acquisition and retention, you really want to think of it your 401k, right? You're going to want maybe a few risk stocks, but you also want some really good blue chip. You want some bonds. You want a little bit of diversity. You want some email humming. You want some SEO going. Some forums or referral traffic coming in, versus just betting the whole farm on Instagram ads or something.
I like it. All right, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Don't bet the farm on Instagram ads.
You can bet the garden. As I always say, you bet the garden, not the farm.
There's a quote of the day: bet the garden, not the farm on Instagram ads.
That's right.
All right, Jake, if people want to find you, kind of learn about what you're working on, what can they do that?
I have 2 websites. I teach digital marketing and e-commerce. One is at ondigitalmarketing.com. There's a bunch of stuff I just kind of open source for free if people are interested in how you can use user empathy and digital marketing cross-channel. So that's there. And then the company we run is tadpull.com. And for folks that are interested, we have a thing called benchmark.tadpull.com. And it's a live 24-hour index. We're grabbing all sorts of data, normalizing it, and you can see how your site compares to shifts by geography for revenue and transactions and all sorts of things for average order value, conversion rate, all that stuff. So we're building that out and kind of opening it up to the community so people have a data set they can compare to. And if they're way off, they kind of know where to start. If, hey, we have good traffic, but conversion rates are really down, we should focus on on-site conversions. It's nice when you can compare yourself to some sort of a benchmark lead. So
yeah,
that's a good place to start.
I like that. I will definitely link to in the show notes, so people should check that out. Awesome. Well, that was super helpful. Thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure. I very much appreciate the invite, and thanks for putting content like this out there. It takes a lot of work to put together podcasts, so tip of the hat for doing the work.